I want to start today by discussing the debt ceiling and infrastructure. Um, Many of my viewers will know that the debt ceiling is a arbitrarily politically contrived piece of nonsense. It's totally useless outside of the political power that it grants people whenever it comes up for a vote. The debt ceiling is entirely a constraint that is decided by Congress. It's not some sort of natural occurrence. It's not like there's something about economics that dictates that we must have a debt ceiling, right? We operate on a fiat currency, and therefore we can spend as much as Congress authorizes. We can always afford to spend on anything that Congress would like to spend on. So that ceiling is just this arbitrarily enforced ceiling that Congress chooses. And then every so often, we have to vote on either raising the ceiling or eliminating the ceiling. And it creates political leverage. So the Joe Manchins of the world, or recently as well, the Mitch McConnells of the world, can take that necessary vote that the government needs to continue functioning and politicize it and leverage it for some other horrendous agenda that they would like to accomplish. So I just want to make sure that my audience understands that the debt ceiling is not some sort of macroeconomic concept. It's a politically applied constraint. It's Congress choosing to limit its ability to spend. And it unfortunately ends up being used as leverage. It ends up weaponizing some of the worst actors in our political process and ends up leading to horrendous policy because of that leverage. The debt ceiling currently set to expire sometime in mid-October. I've seen October 18th as a day that's referenced. So Congress needs to, by then, raise the debt ceiling or preferably just fucking eliminate it because it is completely useless. It does nothing to make us behave more fiscally responsible. In fact, it does quite the opposite. It discourages us from spending in responsible ways. It discourages us from spending in ways that would uplift our society. That, we're dealing with a historic wealth gap. We're dealing with abject poverty for millions of people in this country. We could responsibly spend to deal with these problems if the debt ceiling were not there. Obviously, there are other political constraints as well that stand in the way of us getting the policies that we desperately need. But that debt ceiling is one of them, and it's totally arbitrary and politically imposed. So I want to make sure all of my audience understands that. Don't fall for the mainstream lines that, running out of money, we're going to default, we're this and that. No, these are political choices. That language makes it sound like it's some sort of natural occurrence or some sort of product of economics. It's not. It's just a political decision. So I want to make sure that everybody understands that. Going into some infrastructure negotiation stuff here, that obviously has been the big story as of the last couple of weeks. Progressives had held pretty firm in terms of not decoupling the bipartisan piece of shit infrastructure bill from the reconciliation bill that would actually spend on some decent things. We have an update here. This is ABC News. Bernie Sanders says spending bill's $3.5 trillion price tag likely to be lowered, but $2 trillion is not enough for the social policy package, he added. Really, $3.5 trillion is not enough, and Bernie's acknowledged that too. In order for the bipartisan infrastructure bill and larger social spending package to pass, Senator Bernie Sanders said Sunday the $3.5 trillion budget resolution price tag will likely be lowered. Quote, $3.5 trillion should be a minimum, but I accept that there's going to have to be a give and take, Sanders told ABC This Week co-anchor Jonathan Karl. House progressives have warned leadership they will not vote on President Joe Biden's bipartisan infrastructure bill until the larger human infrastructure bill is also ready for a vote. The budget resolution calls for investments in climate change policy, childcare, and other social programs, and is wider in scope than the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which includes measures to improve the nation's physical infrastructure. Quote, both these bills are going forward in tandem, Sanders said, reiterating the progressive call to hold out on passing infrastructure until the social spending bill is also passed. Moderate sense, let me just correct that. Corporate senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema have said they will not support the bill's $3.5 trillion price tag due to the slim Democratic majority in the Senate. Neither bill will pass unless they have all the votes of the Democrats. Sinema released a statement Saturday accusing progressives of an ineffective stunt and slammed House Democratic leadership for failing to pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Now, notice how that is framed, you guys. Notice how that's framed. She frames it as though progressives are opposing the infrastructure bill. It's very obviously not the case. Now, that infrastructure bill is a piece of shit, but you see how she frames it like, see, these progressives just want to make nothing happen. Well, the irony is, Kyrsten Sinema wrote a book about, I don't know, 15 years ago, maybe a little less, where she touted working with Republicans. She does this fetishized bipartisanship thing to about as nauseating a degree as anybody does. And yet, here, what is she doing now? She is using that same tendency. She's hiding behind that bipartisan tendency to do nothing, to work with Republicans to tank all of it. And by the way, Kyrsten Sinema took off from D.C. to go to some fancy fundraiser with her PAC in Arizona. She claimed she was seeing a foot doctor, but the hotel confirmed that she was going to be at this fancy fucking fundraiser with her PAC. That is who Kyrsten Sinema is. She calls her hero John McCain, if you need to know anything else. So her and Manchin, kind of clearly the two corporatists that are standing in the way of this reconciliation bill getting passed by attempting to decouple it. And if you decouple it, you then can pass the shitty bipartisan bill, and then there's no more leverage left for progressives to utilize when it comes to the reconciliation bill, the $3.5 trillion, which, again, as I have covered on numerous occasions, it's inadequate, you guys. It's not even close to what we need. We need 3 or 4 times that immediately. But the $3.5 trillion does do some good things. Okay, it universal pre-K, tuition-free community college. It expands Medicaid and Medicare, and it does some things to address the climate. Again, not adequate, but it is better than nothing. It is the best that we are possibly going to get. So Manchin and Sinema sitting here, they want to tank it. They don't want that. Their corporate donors don't want that, right? So we'll see where this goes. I will. You guys know I've been critical as all hell of progressives in Congress, but I will give credit where it's due. They have held firm to this point, and they've refused this last week to pass that shitty infrastructure bill, which forces Manchin and Sinema to continue negotiating on the reconciliation bill. Now, I think this sign from Bernie is not a good one. I think this is a sign that we're likely going to see a large chunk of that $3.5 trillion taken off of this bill, and that is a real fucking shame. It is already inadequate. As I said, Sanders himself has acknowledged that. Many progressives have acknowledged that. Ironically, Joe Manchin was asking for $4 or $5 trillion during the election season for infrastructure. But now they're going to hide behind their incoherent deficit and debt fear-mongering, which ties into the first segment about the debt ceiling. So Joe Manchin has absolutely no understanding, you guys, of how a monetary system operates. Either that or he's hiding behind things he knows to be false. One of the two is true. So I am hopeful that we can get some good out of this bill, but it looks like it's going to largely go down in flames in terms of being close to adequate. You know, I think we'll get something, but I don't think it's going to be anything close to adequate, and it's probably going to be less than $3.5 trillion. So I'm puzzled why Joe Manchin. I know Kyle Kulinski mentioned this a couple weeks ago, and he got a bunch of shit for it, but I honestly totally agree with this perspective. Joe Manchin's daughter is in hot water right now for price gouging schemes in big pharma. She was high up in a pharmaceutical company in West Virginia. I do not understand if Biden really actually wants this to get done, which he should, because this is his fucking legacy. If this doesn't get done, his legacy looks even worse than it does currently. So he should want this to get done. If that's really the case, if Biden actually wants this to get done, then why don't you go to Joe Manchin and say, hey, guess what, buddy? I'm in charge of the fucking Justice Department. Your daughter committed fraud. Your daughter engaged in price gouging schemes that screwed over sick people and blue collar workers. We're going to prosecute her to the end of the earth unless you go ahead and go along with this. I don't understand why Biden won't do it. I really don't. I know some lefties called that like engaging in corruption. Listen, I'll get my hands dirty to pass stuff that might actually contribute to saving the fucking planet. All right. If we can leverage her corruption against Joe Manchin to try to pass something good, why the fuck wouldn't we do that? Of course that should happen. And if Biden isn't doing that, then he is committing misconduct. He's refusing to do his job. That's a dereliction of duty if he's refusing to engage in that kind of negotiation. So we'll see what happens going forward with this infrastructure bill. But it's looking like the progressives held strong to a point that this is coming to a head. And unfortunately, as it comes to a head, it looks like we're going to have a lot of that $3.5 trillion knocked off. So We will keep up with this story, and we will keep up with the debt ceiling story as well. Just please, for everybody at home, understand that that is a arbitrary, politically imposed constraint. It is not, some natural part of economics that we have this debt ceiling. Okay, if you don't understand what I'm talking about, go read The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton. Cannot recommend that book highly enough. The Deficit Myth, Stephanie Kelton. Go look into it. MMT informs us why that debt ceiling is not some sort of naturally occurring thing. Okay. So at this point.